Well, hello everybody. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of The Independent Activist. I'm Fra Hughes in Belfast, and I'm delighted and honoured to be joined today by Nigel McCollum. Nigel grew up in Belfast with a very similar kind of history to myself, but we had the kind of political religious divide within the city, which Nigel's going to talk about. He then moved to London and he had a quite fantastic rise through the ranks of the different bodies that he was involved in. I'm going to let him talk about that, but I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I've been chatting to Nigel. He's a great guy. He's an anti-racist. He fights against and rails against injustice. I'll let him describe his politics. I'll let him describe his history and his journey through, we've called this in the belly of the establishment, because Nigel's worked in many, many different fields, and he's going to chat about that. And I'm just going to throw the floor open to you, Nigel. You're very, very, very welcome, buddy. Would you like to start with growing up in Belfast and tell us what that was like before you moved to London?
It was Dunmurry. That's the edge of Belfast. Dunmurry, West Belfast. And I suppose looking back on it now, I was pretty blessed because it wasn't a sectarian family at all. In fact, one of my great uncles was married to a Roman Catholic. Our family wasn't divided along those lines as much. And then we moved to Lisburn. I was telling you that in Dunmurry, even our next door neighbours, Roman Catholic, great friends. We never had that divide at home, which some people might find alien, but I guess that's growing up in Dunmurry and not Ballysillan, the benefits. Lisburn as well. When I lived in Lisburn, I looked down that cul-de-sac and it was next door neighbours, the Kellys, Catholic, my friend Una, her parents, Catholic Dorians. It was a mix the whole way through. So I never had that sectarian divide. And I'd always identified as Irish. And as I
Nigel,
was just
sorry, Nigel, you just have to sit back a wee bit because you're too close to the camera. Thank you. That's perfect.
And I was just thinking that this morning, how lucky we were in 1980s. My school syllabus for English included things like Gino and the Paycock, Sean O'Casey, Seamus Heaney poetry. We went to see him actually in reading live at Queen's. And yeah, I suppose I'm blessed in that I didn't come from that hardcore sectarian, imperialist, colonial, orange background.
It's very, very, very interesting because I have to say our politics kind of mirror each other. And yet I grew up on the other side of the divide. I grew up on the Cliftonville Road. I grew up as we all did, the army checkpoints. I grew up following Cliftonville Football Club. I had to take off my football scarf when I went to the Belfast City Centre for fear of being kind of beaten up by the followers of like Crusaders and Glentoran and Linfield. Now, the city's had a huge demographic change and over the last 30 years. But I grew up in a nationalist Roman Catholic pro-Irish area. And I lived in the Murder Mile with the Shankill Butchers and stuff. I have a story of actually being a friend, being chased by them and escaping from them into the waterworks one night. Long time ago, thankfully. But so that's kind of your upbringing and kind of, obviously you come from like a mixed family. You were exposed, you were just mentioning there to like Irish cultural literary work. So why did you move to London to begin with? And did you go to college or university when you were there? And then what transpired after that?
I was at Queen's, and actually at Queen's, that was the good thing too, because Queen's was very divided politically. I remember the time the Nelson Mandela Hall, oh my God, the unionists were up in arms. It was like, whereas I thought this was brilliant because, of course, I studied anthropology. I went to Queen's to study history. And in my first term, the course was Renaissance Europe. I was like, and I was doing anthropology as a subsidiary subject. And I remember saying to my dad, I'm not happy at all doing this Renaissance Europe. Absolutely boring, really boring. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do anthropology. And he said, well, my advice is if you do something you love, you'll do it best. So you got my blessing. So I did anthropology. And I think that was the biggest moment that absolutely my brain just, expanded. I remember vividly that one of the first lectures from the professor who set the first anthropology department up in Ireland at Queen's, he had been expelled from South Africa because he had married a non-white and he was active in the anti-apartheid movement. But he stood up in that lecture, this white imposing, professor, speaking in the click language of the Khoisan people of the Kalahari Desert. I was just, I don't know, I was like, whoa, you know, this wee fella from Lisbon. There's this man speaking click language. I was just like, whoa. It was like hypnotic. And just seeing the world in anthropology, all these different ways of, you know, religious belief systems, economic systems, kinship systems, political systems that were very valid, so different to ours. Just opened my brain, opened my brain. So I suppose maybe in a way, well, Northern Ireland at that period didn't offer much hope for our late 80s. There wasn't much hope for jobs and opportunities. And London seemed the logical step as well after anthropology, because I thought then, because you know, you've been to London as a kid, you know, odd times visiting on school trips or whatever. And there was anthropology in a little bubble in my head, naively. You know, there's this place where there are, you know, African people, Asian people. So it seemed a logical choice. Seemed a logical choice. And it was a rude awakening, actually. Because I mentioned this to you, even then, I realized I had to edit who I was, even though I could say, no, 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 but I'm Protestant. I could say, no, 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 but I'm not. The mood music, because of Canary Wharf, Birmingham, Guildford, you know, the liberation struggle, you were deemed Irish. So that, in a way, my Irishness that I sort of felt but didn't wear it as a big badge, it became imposed on me by the British. They imposed it on me just by moving to London. I'm Irish. I had to soften my accent. I had to. It was a very strange time. Um, a bit of a rude awakening, I'd say, when you actually realize, you know, wait a minute, Protestant Northern Ireland, but we're supposed to be part of this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But actually, nah, you're Irish. And I suppose it, in my mind, again, thinking about history back at school, it reminded me, you know, the anti-Catholic legislation that came in too in London, in Westminster. So then it actually, that sense of being outside and the other was imposed on me by the very people who, in fact, should have been saying, we embrace you because we're a United Kingdom. Actually, they immediately showed me, you're not one of us. And it all started to fossilize me politically as a person, what motivates me. Um, and the one theme throughout my life, it's maybe I'm hyper vigilant, but injustice. Injustice is one thing that I'm hyper alert to everywhere. Um, and I suppose I'm blessed with a character that I'm not backwards and coming forwards. I'll speak up,
It's
even if it's not
amazing in a
me.
way. Sorry, Nigel, but you became a paddy in London
Yeah,
because it's part of what I would call, you know, English racism. Not every English person's a racist, obviously,
yeah,
but there is that kind of subheading through the
yeah.
media, through the government, through the establishment, through the
Mm,
statutory bodies, that if you're
mm,
from Scotland, you're a jock. If you're from
mhm,
Wales, you're a taffy. If you're from Ireland, north or south, you're a paddy. So it's a
mhm.
form of racism. It's not
Oh, totally,
dehumanizing people, but it's
totally.
putting you on the different levels and the different stratas of society.
Mm,
So you're not an individual with your own
mm.
personality. You're just
No,
another paddy. And you
yeah.
mentioned in London.
And a dangerous one, Pat, for that was at that time you were seen as a danger, just like Muslims face it now. They're the threat within. We were the threat within, writ large, on the English mindset. So my sanctuary in London, I mean, I lived in Brixton when I first moved. My sanctuary was actually meeting, I mean, they sound like Cockneys, they sound like Londoners, but they're Irish, you know, the children of the generation that had moved in the 50s, like the Windrush generation. They'd come to help rebuild Britain after the war, but also they'd come for a better life. Um, so my sanctuary was around those people, which was a blessing. But it did, you're right. It actually, and I wear it with pride now. I call myself a paddy with pride, absolute pride. I hold my head up high. Um, because I also think, what other little country of only 5 million people? Every person in the world has heard of it. If I was Slovenian, I could go halfway around the world and go, where? Slovenia? Everyone knows the Irish, and they have a positive about it, except the English.
Well, part of that comes down to obviously the famine. I mean, we
Yep.
had an imposed famine on us, just like we're watching being imposed on the people
Mm,
of Gaza and increasingly in the West Bank. There are 54 million Irish Americans who claim descent from the people who left during the famine of 1847 to 1852 and afterwards. So you have the diaspora in London, Manchester, Liverpool,
Hmm.
Glasgow, New York, Canada, Australia, obviously, and there were indentured slaves as such that were brought to the
Yeah.
colonies as well
Hmm.
as part of a
Hmm.
depopulation of Ireland and a repopulation of the colonies. And you mentioned before, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. You're
Hmm.
right. The Irish people who were treated as potential terrorists and criminals in Britain, that's now being fostered upon the Muslim Islamic
Hmm.
community because there
Definitely.
is an established
Hmm.
narrative that the Muslim is your enemy, the
Hmm.
Muslim is the terrorist. Personally, I believe that this people in Zionism want to turn people like Tommy Robinson and others who you would imagine are anti Semite into pro right wing Zionists who are then promoting the agenda that Islamists, people who follow the Islam religion, are the terrorists. So
Hmm.
anti Semitism is to be replaced by Islamophobia. And
Hmm.
today in Belfast at 1 p.m. at the City Hall, there's a fascist rally against immigration. And there'll be people like myself there for the counter demonstration. But
Hmm.
if you like to follow on, then you've been in London,
Hmm.
you have a support group in a community, you're
Hmm.
railing against injustice, and then obviously
Hmm.
you have to find something to pay the bills. So,
And
what was your
it's,
first job? Why were you
well,
drawn to it? What did it lead
my
to?
refugee council, refugee, and that opened my eyes too. You see, people talk about the hostile environment at the time of Theresa May for asylum seekers and migrants and refugees, and it's on steroids now. The narrative about, I mean, they've dehumanized these people. They're like invading like cockroaches. I mean, it's just awful. But way back then, and that would have been what I would have been starting. John Major was coming in after Thatcher. It was a hostile environment for her. It was really hostile. I remember the Refugee Council. There was one day a week. We literally, one of my, I mean, really mundane job, but really a vital job. We had to pay 20, we gave them £25 in cash so they could go and buy the card they needed to register that they had to show with the police every week. They had to go to police stations to show, can't remember the name of it, but we paid the £25 for them to actually get the card that would enable them to basically report to a police station every week. It was very hostile even then. So people who think it was just a hostile environment um, since Theresa May, no, no, no. This continued. It started well when I knew it. You know, John Major years and Blair didn't make it any easier at all. It's just got more and more hostile, and it's just. I mean, the irony always slaps me in the face because we look at a map of the world. I remember actually one of my great aunts did have an old atlas. She lived in Upper Falls, um, going up towards Dunmurry, and she had an old atlas, and I was fascinated because but if you looked at the map of the world, it was pink, majority pink, the British Empire, and it wasn't people going for a better life; it was going to, loot, pillage, and oppress. But they're absolutely paranoid now about any of these people coming to England. It's like, what? What do you expect? I mean, you made them believe that this was the motherland. So, I mean, mad. They're mad. Madness, madness. And so that was Refugee Council. And then you see, this is another issue I've noticed, especially in my anti-racist work. So many people get seduced and co-opted instead of holding on to that anti-racist liberatory message of Pan-Africanism and even Malcolm X. They get seduced and co-opted by this capitalist system that basically to succeed, you have to do a David Lammy. You have to whiten yourself. Because if you're black and stay like Diane Abbott, we will crush you. We will demonize you every day of your life. Even though at every election, Diane Abbott increases her majority because she is a bloody good constituency MP. But she's true to herself. And then we have the David Lammies, the Kemi Badenochs. They're the example they want to hold up. You know, it's like, you'll see the king has appointed a black equerry, co-opted. If that guy started to quote Malcolm X over breakfast in Buckingham Palace with the staff, you can be sure he'll be replaced pretty soon. And
Yeah, you
that's
can
that's the
see.
problem. They get co-opted. And that was I got seduced too. I got seduced too. So after the Refugee Council, Gaza, UN, and again, I don't know. It's a trait in my personality that I just recognize that's me, and I'm not going to fight it. I actually own it now. When I start to see hypocrisy, I'm out of there. I can't cope. I really can't cope. It festers in my mind. So, like in Gaza, the Western workers for the UN and things. Well, one, they've got the UN club right at the beach. I don't know if it's probably been bombed by the Zionists now, but the UN club, they've got their club where they can get alcohol and live their little Western expat life. And then at the weekends, whoa, the convoy of white UN vehicles heading up to Erez to go up to their apartment that they rent in Jaffa. Apartments in these beautiful old buildings that were stolen from Palestinians. So I was like, is the irony slapping me in the face or what's going on here? So when I'm exploring Gaza, going, with ordinary Palestinian shababs going down to Brazil camps, seeing areas that I didn't know at the weekend, these blokes, and so I went up to the weekend with them. That's what opened my eyes. I'm thinking of as well, a lovely woman whose partner worked at um in the UN in Gaza, and she was at the Norwegian embassy. They lived in this beautiful house in Nevat Tzedek, an old part of Tel Aviv, but was actually old Palestinian properties. The Swiss deputy ambassador, I remember, lived in this amazing house in Rehov HaShachav, Seagull Street in Jaffa, as they call it, but in Jaffa, an old Palestinian house, probably owned by a rich Palestinian merchant at the time, stolen by the Zionists, and the Swiss government are renting it out to the Zionists. I mean, you couldn't make it up to me. I just thought this is just bullshit. And part of my job thought was human rights. حقوق الإنسان. I never asked her about to you. But there is no human rights. This is a really big, ridiculous thing. Why are we calling ourselves, human rights monitors, human rights activists, there is none. There is none. But we've got this pen and Western currency. At the weekend, it's like, oh, get me out of here. These poor Gazans don't have that luxury. They don't have the luxury to actually leave Gaza to go to the house in Jaffa that probably belonged to their great great uncle. It's like just no. This is what I mean. It's almost like I saw a white savior complex writ large. Really bothered me. Really bothered me. And I still see it going on this day. They're good at the talk, but they're not good at action. We have to, it's always, the media's, we have to condemn Hamas. We have to condemn October the 7th. And it's like, whoa, where did this vacuum come from? Where are you creating this vacuum from? And I always say, after having lived in Gaza with my personality, I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I could understand why I might myself be so frustrated and angry. Becoming a suicide bomber might be the best option for me. Seriously, the anger I would feel because these people are people say open air prison camp. No. It's trapped rats because they've dehumanized them. A prison is like prisoners with structure and order and 3 meals a day and exercise. They don't have that. Prisoners get much better treatment. These people are devoid of hope. And we're the ones who could give them hope. And we don't. And just by being there, I think, what a great fallacy. What a great fallacy we're doing. And the very fact there was Western, white-skinned UN staff and NGO staff, it wasn't even enough to stop the barbaric onslaught of the Zionists. It wasn't. So what is our purpose? Our purpose is better being outside, magnifying their voice, not inside trying to make ourselves feel good. My view.
No, 100%. Yes, the savior complex. Plus, people are career politicians like Lamy, will say anything, do anything. Starmer's supposed to be a human rights lawyer. Starmer was a man who locked up Julian Assange. He's a safe pair of hands for the deep state. That's why they got rid of. That's why they got rid of Corbyn, the best prime minister you never had.
Totally agree. Corbyn. That's one thing I will always have resentment to. Corbyn Now, the only time I've ever voted Labour in my life, I'll be honest, I'm not into politics, but Labour, I mean, this myth that Labour was once a great left-wing party, myth. Um, even from Callaghan years, I mean, that's a right-wing party. But I voted Labour once for Ken Livingstone, twice for Ken Livingstone. Never voted for them again. But Corbyn gave me hope. The fact that they absolutely destroyed him, I will hold a lot of resentment for that. He was a transform. He had the power to transform this country into what it could be. But again, I have to blame Jeremy too because he wasn't ruthless enough. If he had been as ruthless as Starmer was when he became leader, I think that's the problem. Corbyn is just a nice man. He's a good human. But I wish he'd been more ruthless with the right wing in his party instead of trying to bring them in. But hey, that's history, isn't it?
I think that's partly down, you're correct, to his personality, and
Yeah,
partly
very
down to
nice
the
man.
fact, yep, some people are party apparatchiks, if that's a correct word. So they do what's best for the party. So when people say, look, bring everyone in together, try and find a consensus, try and move forward, that's probably his brand of consensus politics.
Mhm.
But the
Yeah,
establishment, the media, they were all out to get him, called him an
yeah,
anti-Semite, pulled the rug under him. Well, George Galloway said that very, very, very early on.
mhm,
Do a purge the way
yeah,
Starmer has purged anyone
oh,
who's
yeah. Mhm.
remotely left of centre or even centre. He's got them all out of the party. Just wanted to mention that. Sorry, Nigel, just the West
No,
Bank for 1 second,
yeah,
because I've been over there 3 times. I was over for 14
mhm,
days in and around 2012, 2013 with the East Jerusalem YMCA. I was in Nablus and I was in
mhm,
East Jerusalem and I was in Bethlehem and I went to the Friday protest at Nabi Saleh. I
mhm,
met people in the West Bank who couldn't go to Jerusalem and couldn't take their children to the beach because of
mhm.
the checkpoints on the way. They need
Shelter.
permits to travel from one part of the West Bank to
Mhm,
the other. As a foreigner, I was able to go in. I have
mhm,
a very close friend here, Palestinian. He can't go back. Do you know
mhm,
what I mean? As part of the Resolution 194, they're all meant to be able to have the ability to return. But
mhm,
once you leave, they won't let you back in again. So
mhm.
terrible what's happening there. But you mentioned the UN, you mentioned the Gaza, you mentioned the Savior
And just
conflict.
another little thing I've just remembered, and
Yeah.
that's in 19. I don't know which Intifada it was, but when late 1980s, before I came to London, I actually went. I was in East Jerusalem, up in
Mm,
St George's. That was my first time after having the irony growing up in Northern Ireland. Never experienced tear gas. I got tear
mm,
gas, not near me, but for the way the wind was blowing, I experienced tear gas from the days of the Intifada, and I was just about 19. And I was
mm,
thinking, whoa, never experience. People think you must have that every day back home,
mm.
and many did. But that was my first experience in East Jerusalem at St George's.
I can't wait to read the book that you're going to write, buddy. I really
Yeah,
can't.
one day when I get time.
So let's move on. So you were talking
Yeah,
about you were with the Refugee Council, I assume
mhm.
UK. Then you
Yeah,
were
British
involved with
Refugee
the
Council.
UN on the ground in Gaza.
Mhm.
Saw the I'm going to call it corruption. I don't mean like there's graft involved or money going missing, but the corruption of the soul, the
And I'm going to
corruption of
call
the
it
person.
liberalism, the poison of white European liberalism.
Perfect
And what
description.
I call it, it reminds me of what my great aunt would say. When if you sit in the fence too long, you'll get a sore arse. And that's white liberalism. They must have absolute bed sores, riddled with bed sores in their nice tailored suits.
Well, you mentioned the fact that they'll give the speeches, even in the UN when they're calling for a ceasefire, they're
Mhm,
calling for humanitarian
mhm,
aid to be led into Gaza and stuff.
mhm.
It is lip service. If they're not going to do
No.
anything
Mhm,
about it, then it's just I could almost imagine someone getting up in the UN, making a speech, and then going out and talking to the Israeli ambassador or the Saudi
yeah.
Arabian
Oh,
ambassador
they
or the
do. They
ambassador for
do.
UAE, going to have a beer afterwards somewhere in New
Yeah.
York, have a
Yeah.
nice dinner. It's the public persona in front of the cameras, followed by the not secret but behind the scenes kind of machinations and perhaps even saying, "Look, I had to say that. It's my job
Mhm,
as a UN human rights rapporteur or
mhm.
whatever to say these kind of things." So, what job did you do after Gaza? Because you've
Well,
obviously
then,
you go in with the right thing and the right heart, and you
mhm.
go in on a humanitarian basis to help.
I mean,
And then
my whole
once you're
career.
inside, you see the
Yeah.
hypocrisy, So what
My
else have you seen?
my career, if you look at my CV, you think, wow, brilliant.
Exactly,
But
man.
it
Man.
always ended with a resignation letter. It's like it always like I'm done with this. I think that's the Paddy in me too. And basically, feck you. But no, the other. Well, then I was a bit. After you've sort of resigned, I never learned that lesson. You're a bit of
Mm,
a. It's a bit hard to get back on. But I did get back on, and I was actually working at that led to something interesting that I regret. But at a barrister's chambers in London Temple, not a lawyer. This was like a research role,
mhm,
um, and they did a lot of international law. And through that, I actually got then to join the team for Cameroon at the International Court when they took Nigeria to the ICJ, where South Africa is currently taking Israel. They took Nigeria to the ICJ on a land dispute, a land and maritime dispute. Um, I regret that big time, but that's maybe another story because I realized actually I was on the wrong side because actually what we've seen now in the Bakassi Peninsula in Nigeria are people who are now part of Cameroon who are actually through an artificial border that the ICJ has agreed on,
mhm.
separate from their people in Nigeria. With hindsight, I can say I regret it, but it was great experience. It was great experience. Um, and probably I was a bit young still, a bit, I was a bit of an unpolished stone, and I also needed a job. I mean, let's face it, I needed a job. So
Mhm.
I wasn't going to start doing loads of in-depth research and then say, no, no, I can't possibly take that because Cameroon's wrong. The ICJ agreed with Cameroon, but they agreed with Cameroon based on old colonial era documents. Oof. And now I still think of it. There are people in the Bakassi Peninsula who were forcibly made to be part of Cameroon who actually now are separated by this border from their
Mhm.
kinsfolk. Yeah, but anyway, that's what I did, and then I I stood as a councillor in East London because that was one of the things too. When I was living, I moved from South London to East London, Bow, and Bow. I was living actually on a council estate, um, and interesting. You mean that was an area that was all slums? These were council estates put up when they cleared the slums in the '60s. Um, but it started before I stood at I started to see here in London the complete disconnect from me commuting to a job in the West End, the centre. Here in London, these pockets of deprivation, of discrimination, of alienation, and it really again, I started. This is not right. And of course, me, as I said, talk to anyone. I was talking to loads of people. And eventually there was going to be a council election, and again, another regret. I couldn't be Labour, but those seats were held by the Liberal Democrats at the turn of the century. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll join the Liberal Democrats, and I got elected. I lasted 1 year as a Liberal Democrat, and I had to go independent because I realized even again the scales were taken off my eyes. Councillors, and I don't know what it's like back home, but councillors in England, 90% of them, they're doing it for ego. They're doing it because they've got this false idea it's a practice run to stand as an MP.
Mhm.
They see themselves in Parliament. But for me, I thought in my ward, I was the voice
The people.
for the people. So it could be Mrs. Begum's dripping tap, or it could be noisy neighbors for someone else, or it could be someone living in overcrowded conditions, or it could be damp, or it could be a problem with the school. It could be anything. But I thought it was my job to be able to have access to solve their problem. Um, because you could be having an inquiry from social services, a wrongful inquiry,
Mhm.
or it could just, as I said, a dripping tap. Those are big things to that person. They're getting on their nerve. This is a big burden in their head. So I thought, well, my job is just to try and ease the burden. Um, so I hated the party politics, the toxicity of it all. But it opened my eyes too, because that was the time when Blair, that really, I think that's when I started to really form my anti-racism views too, because I mean, on Roman Road, which is a big market area of Bow, which in the 1970s Bengalis would never go to because they'd be beaten up by the National Front.
Mhm.
But Blair introduced antisocial behavior orders, And in my ward alone, I was the only lone voice in council standing up and pointing out that in the summer evenings, there could be four black youths standing. Maybe some people think they can smell marijuana, maybe, but it's not that. It's the way they're saggy trackies, hoodies, the way they're talking, the culture, whatever. Antisocial behavior orders would be slapped on them for loitering. And those antisocial behavior orders, if you got so many, your parents could lose their council tenancy. Yet, further down the street, white chavs in their Reeboks and, polo shirts outside a pub with beer could be, whatever, nothing. So I suddenly realized, whoa, the government, Labour government, and our council that's implementing it are actually racializing antisocial behavior. So again, like everything, stop and search, access to healthcare, um, you know, educational performance. It's all, if you're black, you're going to be hammered by this. Awful. Um, and it's still, I mean, yeah. So I was really, that really sort of focused me to think more about racial disparities that period, early turn of the century. And then that naturally led me to I did work in Bangladesh, but that's vast for this podcast. I don't even know where to start because that was because I got elected in Bo. I decided I need to go out to Bangladesh because a huge part of my residents were Bengali, so I wanted to go to Bangladesh to see about what Bangladesh was like, and that because of my background in Gaza and the Refugee Council, I discovered by chance there was this group of what were called the stranded Pakistani refugees, the Biharis. But that is another big story for another podcast. But again, when I got really excited about it and thought, whoa, this could be, read up about it, came up with a plan that I thought could work to solve it. And I was told hot potato, too contentious. Don't touch it. Do not touch it. Hasn't been solved, for decades. Don't even go near it. But that's to me is just like, come on, solve it. So, but that's another story for so. And then that led me to a job at the Commonwealth. Oh, oh. But again, all these periods, I roll my eyes. But wow, what eye openers they were! Absolute eye openers.
It's some journey you've been on, absolutely. I'd be very interested in getting into more in depth in some of these stories.
I haven't even got to the other. So yeah, no, it is interesting. The journey of a paddy.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's the amazing thing too.
Where's the title of your
And I
book?
think I think it's because I'm called Nigel
Mm-hmm.
that I got that far.
Yes,
If
yes,
I
yes.
if I had a Gaelic name, an Irish
Mm-hmm.
name,
Mm-hmm.
if I had Gaelicized my name, like my middle, if I'm Edward McCollum, I wouldn't have got that far.
Mm-hmm.
You have to use use the handicaps you've been given at birth. So
Well,
yeah,
it's people's perceptions. You see, it's how you
that's
speak.
it.
It's how
Yeah.
you kind of how you come across, your
Mm,
personality, your education, your language, your dress,
mhm,
your color. People put
mhm.
you. People compartmentalize you and put you in a box,
Yeah,
or they prejudge you and think he's one of us. Do you know what I
they
mean?
do. Yeah, and I did learn that trick early on. Nice suit, nice tie. I did. But thank God, I never did a lammy.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
stayed like a Bernie Grant.
You've too
So
much personal integrity. Listen, we're going to wrap it up here in a minute or two.
mhm.
Just want to finish it by asking you: do you have any hope going forward for the establishment? Do you have any hope for this fractured society that we're living in, which is being destroyed by neoliberal austerity and a very much perceived move to the right across the whole of Europe and America?
The only hope I hold on to is the fact that at grassroots there is a human spirit of resilience and knows what's right. It's really hard now because I see even among my anti-racist work in London, young black people who should know better are seduced more by TikTok
Mm-hmm.
and celebrity culture and are forgetting people like Marcus Garvey, Maurice Bishop in Grenada, the New Jewel movement. They're forgetting all that. But there are ways to get it back. But more than that, I was actually listening to someone, yes, it was Chris Hedges talking about in what's happening in America. The
He's good.
the election was between corporatism
Mm-hmm.
and oligarchs.
Mm-hmm.
Corporatism was the Democrats. That would have been the status quo, neoliberal, big business in control, don't rock the boat. A bit progressive here and there, but but the oligarchs won. And that's a really perverse form of anarchy. And there's a lot of good things in anarchy, but they're not they're not anarchists. But it is destroy, disrupt. And he said the only way out, and was it him or something? Aristotle or Socrates, the only way out when it's oligarchs in power is utter collapse and tyranny, and you live under a tyrannical system, or revolution.
Yeah,
So I held on to that word. And before when I was getting ready to come on this, I thought, what do I want to? Bob Marley, Zimbabwe. I was listening to that, and I thought that gives me hope. That people can rise up. So that's my hope. That is my hope.
Well, okay, revolutionary Nigel McCollum, I want to thank you very much for joining us. I look forward to our next episode together, because it's very interesting. The insight that you've had, and you have my utter respect, because you haven't compromised, brother. You haven't compromised. You haven't lost your personal integrity. You're still, after all these years. We started off in the 1980s, and we're now in the 2020s. You're talking about 40 odd years that you've stood up for the individual and for those who are marginalized in society. And for that, you have my utmost respect. Thank you.
Thank you, and you too. Thanks, Fra.
I think that's
a wrap.
That's a wrap. I'm just going to end recording, buddy. I'm going to go for this other interview, and I'll catch you later.
All the best, Fra.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your day.
No, thank you. Yeah, you too. Be in touch.
All right, buddy. Take care.
All the best.